The humid air felt like a weighted blanket, suffocating and inescapable as it clung to exposed skin. On July 13, 1942, Lieutenant Zhao Wen of the Chinese Medical Corps crouched in a makeshift field laboratory just outside Myitkyina in northern Burma, his fingers trembling slightly as they adjusted the dials of his microscope. Around him, stacked on every available surface, were dozens of captured Japanese gas masks, their rubber faceplates staring up like disembodied ghosts in the flickering lantern light. The monsoon rain hammered against the canvas roof with such force that it seemed the entire structure might collapse at any moment. Sweat beaded on Zhao's forehead as he carefully extracted a sample from the filter canister of the enemy mask and placed it on a glass slide. The material looked identical to what he had seen in the previous 17 masks, a seemingly ordinary layer of charcoal-treated cotton and chemical absorbent. But something was different about these newer models. Something that might explain the horrific scenes his medical unit had witnessed 3 days earlier, when an entire Japanese regiment collapsed during combat operations in the hills west of Bamo. No one in the Chinese Fifth Army knew that one man's discovery that afternoon would rewrite the battlefield calculus of the entire Burma campaign and save thousands of Allied lives. Zhao placed the slide under the microscope lens and leaned forward. Behind him, Captain Huang Wei of the 38th Division Medical Corps silently observed, his notebook poised to record any findings. In the dim light, Zhao's face suddenly froze in an expression of disbelief. He adjusted the focus, double-checked the sample, and then slowly straightened up. "Calcium oxide," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the rumble of thunder outside. "They've replaced the potassium hydroxide layer with calcium oxide." Neither man yet understood the full implications of what they had found, how a small chemical substitution made during wartime shortages would render an entire generation of Japanese protective equipment catastrophically vulnerable to specific gas compounds. Neither man could possibly imagine that within weeks this discovery would work its way up the command chain to Allied headquarters and fundamentally alter the strategic landscape of the China-Burma-India theater. Born in Chengdu, in the province of Sichuan in 1911, Zhao Wen had shown exceptional aptitude for chemistry from an early age. The son of a traditional medicine practitioner, he had grown up surrounded by herbs, compounds, and the precise art of measuring substances to affect the human body. His father had hoped that Zhao would follow in the family tradition, but the young man's curiosity had pulled him toward Western scientific methods. In 1934, Zhao had entered the National Medical College in Shanghai, where his professors quickly recognized his talent for toxicology and chemical analysis. While other students struggled with laboratory techniques, Zhao displayed an intuitive understanding of molecular interactions and a meticulous attention to detail that set him apart. It was during his final year of studies that Japan launched its full-scale invasion of China. Zhao watched with horror as newsreels showed Japanese warplanes dropping bombs on civilian areas in Shanghai. He witnessed the endless stream of casualties flowing into the teaching hospital, many displaying symptoms consistent with exposure to mustard gas and other chemical agents. Where others saw only tragedy, Zhao recognized a call to action. Upon graduation in 1938, he immediately volunteered for the Chinese Army Medical Corps. His initial assignment had been to a field hospital in Jiangxi province, where he quickly distinguished himself by improvising effective treatments for soldiers exposed to Japanese tear gas. His recommendations for modifications to standard Chinese gas masks saved hundreds of lives during engagements in the spring of 1939. These achievements earned him a transfer to the specialized chemical defense section of the Medical Corps, where he helped train medical personnel to recognize and treat the effects of various chemical weapons. By 1941, Zhao had been promoted to lieutenant and placed in charge of a mobile chemical analysis unit. When the Chinese Expeditionary Force was formed to help defend Burma against the Japanese invasion in early 1942, Zhao's unit was attached to the force, given its expertise with Japanese chemical warfare tactics. Throughout his rise through the ranks, Zhao had maintained the same methodical approach to problem-solving that had characterized his work as a student. He took nothing for granted and questioned everything, particularly when it came to equipment design. This questioning nature would prove invaluable in the jungles of Burma. where standard operating procedures often failed in the face of extreme conditions. Zhao had arrived in Burma in February 1942, just as the Japanese 15th Army began its push northward from Thailand. His unit had been immediately tasked with ensuring that Chinese forces had adequate protection against potential chemical attacks, a daunting assignment given the chronic supply shortages and the primitive conditions of the jungle front. For the first weeks of the campaign, Zhao's team had conducted routine analyses of air and water samples, looking for signs of chemical contamination. They had examined dozens of soldiers who displayed symptoms consistent with exposure to irritant gases, though none of the cases had proven fatal. The work was important but unremarkable, until July 10th, when reports began filtering in of an entire Japanese unit that had seemingly collapsed during an ordinary engagement near Burma. Captain Huang Wei had been among the first Chinese officers to reach the scene. A medical officer with the Chinese 38th Division, Huang had trained under General Sun Li-jen at the Chinese Military Academy and had seen extensive combat against the Japanese in mainland China. Yet nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he found in that jungle clearing. Over 300 Japanese soldiers lying incapacitated, many already dead with no signs of conventional wounds. The men had been found with their gas masks either on their faces or clutched in their hands. Initially, Huang had assumed that they had been the victims of their own chemical weapons deployment gone wrong, a theory supported by the presence of spent smoke canisters nearby. But there was something odd about the scene. The distribution of bodies suggested that the men had not collapsed all at once, but over a period of several minutes, as if something had progressively failed in their protective equipment. Huang had collected several of the gas masks and brought them to the nearest Chinese field hospital, where Zhao's chemical analysis unit was based. The two men had never met before, but they shared an immediate understanding of the importance of what had been found. While Huang returned to his unit, Zhao began the painstaking process of examining the captured masks. For 3 days, working by lamplight in the mobile laboratory, Zhao had disassembled, measured, and analyzed every component of the Japanese Type 99 gas masks. He had tested filter materials, examined valve mechanisms, and scrutinized manufacturing details. And now he had found something, a seemingly minor change in the chemical composition of the filter that might explain everything. Calcium oxide, commonly known as quicklime, was an effective neutralizing agent for many chemical warfare compounds. Under normal conditions, it performed similarly to the potassium hydroxide that had been used in earlier Japanese mask designs. But when exposed to the extreme humidity of the Burmese monsoon season, calcium oxide underwent a chemical transformation that drastically reduced its effectiveness against certain types of gas. More significantly, this transformation could be accelerated by specific chemical catalysts present in the standard-issue Japanese smoke grenades. In the days that followed, Zhao and Huang worked tirelessly to document their findings. They conducted controlled experiments using captured Japanese equipment, confirming that the combination of high humidity and the chemical compounds in Japanese smoke grenades could indeed render the masks useless within minutes. The implications were staggering. The Japanese had inadvertently created a vulnerability in their own defensive equipment, a vulnerability that could be exploited with devastating effect. By July 22nd, their report had reached the headquarters of General Joseph Stilwell, the American commander of Allied forces in the China-Burma-India theater. Stilwell, a gruff and pragmatic leader known to his Chinese troops as Vinegar Joe, immediately recognized the strategic value of the discovery. He ordered his staff to develop tactical applications based on Zhao's findings, while simultaneously implementing measures to protect Allied forces from similar vulnerabilities. The chemical substitution that Zhao had identified was not an isolated incident. As the war had intensified across the Pacific, Japan had faced increasing shortages of critical raw materials. Industrial chemicals, including the potassium hydroxide traditionally used in gas mask filters, had become scarce as shipping lanes were disrupted and production facilities were targeted by Allied bombing. Japanese engineers had been forced to seek alternatives, often with inadequate testing under field conditions. What made the situation particularly ironic was that Japan had been among the most prolific users of chemical weapons in the war. Since the invasion of China in 1937, Japanese forces had deployed chemical agents on over 2,000 occasions, primarily against Chinese troops and civilians. They had established specialized units, such as the infamous Unit 731, to develop and test chemical and biological weapons on human subjects. The Japanese army had achieved significant tactical advantages through the use of tear gas, sneezing agents, and more lethal compounds like mustard gas and lewisite. These advantages stemmed in part from the fact that Chinese forces often lacked adequate protective equipment. A Japanese military document from 1939, titled Lessons from the China Incident, had explicitly noted the poor quality of Chinese gas masks, the inconsistent distribution of masks among Chinese units, and the inadequate training in their use. Now, in a twist of fate that even the most imaginative strategist could not have predicted, the situation had reversed. The Japanese forces in Burma, who had come to rely on their chemical weapons superiority, suddenly found themselves vulnerable to their own tactics. And the Chinese Medical Corps, which had struggled for years to protect its troops from Japanese chemical attacks, had discovered the key to exploiting this vulnerability. The monsoon rains continued to pound the jungle as August arrived, turning roads into rivers and making large-scale military operations nearly impossible. But beneath the surface of this apparent stalemate, a flurry of activity was taking place within Allied headquarters. Teams of chemists, engineers, and tactical specialists worked to develop new weapons and strategies based on Zhao's discovery. Specialized training programs were established to teach Allied troops how to exploit the weakness in Japanese protective equipment while safeguarding themselves against similar vulnerabilities. The challenge was to develop a compound that would specifically target the calcium oxide in the Japanese filters while remaining effective in the humid conditions of the jungle. After numerous experiments, a modified version of chloroacetophenone, the active ingredient in tear gas, was identified as the most promising candidate. When combined with a particular catalyst and delivered in aerosol form, it would rapidly neutralize the Japanese filters while causing minimal harm to Allied troops equipped with properly designed masks. By early September, the first batches of the new compound were being produced at a hastily established facility near Lado in Assam, India. Codenamed Operation Quicksilver, the production effort was shrouded in secrecy, with only a handful of senior officers aware of its true purpose. Even the workers at the facility believed they were manufacturing conventional tear gas canisters for defensive use. As the production ramped up, Allied planners faced a difficult decision. The monsoon season would not end until October, making large-scale offensive operations impractical. But waiting too long risked giving the Japanese time to identify and correct the flaw in their gas masks. After much debate, a compromise was reached. Limited tactical deployments would begin in late September, targeting key Japanese strongpoints along the Burma Road. The first such operation took place on September 27th, when a Chinese-American task force attacked a Japanese roadblock near Tengchong. As the Allied forces advanced, they deployed the modified gas compound using mortar-fired canisters. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, the Japanese defenders were incapacitated, unable to maintain their positions despite having donned their gas masks at the first sign of attack. Similar operations followed in rapid succession, each achieving the same remarkable results. Japanese units that had held strong defensive positions for months were suddenly unable to resist even limited Allied probes. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical effects. Japanese soldiers began to lose confidence in their protective equipment, leading to hesitation and confusion during engagements. By mid-October, as the monsoon rains finally began to subside, the strategic landscape in northern Burma had been transformed. The Japanese 15th Army, which had advanced confidently into Burma earlier in the year, now found itself on the defensive, unable to counter a chemical threat that bypassed its protective measures. Allied forces, led by Chinese divisions and American Special Operations units, began to reclaim territory that had been lost during the initial Japanese offensive. The success of these operations caught the attention of Allied commanders in other theaters, who requested details of the tactics being employed in Burma. However, concerns about potential escalation led to strict limitations on the use of the modified gas compound. General Stilwell, with the approval of the Allied Combined Chiefs of Staff, established clear guidelines. The compound would be used only in specific tactical situations, primarily to reduce Allied casualties during assaults on fortified positions. For Lieutenant Zhao and Captain Huang, the success of Operation Quicksilver brought professional recognition but also personal reflection. Both men had entered medicine with the intention of saving lives, not developing more effective means of warfare. Yet they understood the paradox of their situation. By exploiting a vulnerability in Japanese equipment, they were helping to shorten the war and ultimately reduce the total number of casualties on both sides. In late November 1942, Zhao was summoned to Allied headquarters in Delhi, where he was awarded the Legion of Merit by American authorities and the Order of the Cloud and Banner by the Chinese government. The citation accompanying these honors made no mention of Operation Quicksilver or the specific nature of Zhao's discovery, referring only to exceptional technical contributions to Allied defensive capabilities. During the ceremony, General Stilwell took Zhao aside and spoke to him privately. According to Zhao's later recollections, Stilwell expressed both gratitude for the lieutenant's work and regret at the necessity of using chemical compounds in warfare. He also informed Zhao that the Japanese had begun to modify their gas mask designs, suggesting that the tactical advantage gained from the discovery might be temporary. Indeed, by December 1942, intelligence reports indicated that Japanese forces in Burma were receiving new gas masks with redesigned filters that used a different chemical absorption system. The masks were being prioritized for frontline units, particularly those facing Chinese forces, indicating that the Japanese had at least partially identified the source of their vulnerability. But the strategic momentum had already shifted. The Japanese offensive in Burma had been blunted, and Allied forces were beginning to establish the bases and supply routes that would eventually support major counteroffensives in 1943 and 44. The exploitation of the gas mask vulnerability had provided a critical breathing space for these preparations, allowing Allied commanders to rebuild their forces and develop effective jungle warfare tactics. For the remainder of the war, Lieutenant Zhao continued to serve with the Chinese Medical Corps, advancing to the rank of Major by 1945. His expertise in chemical defense led to numerous improvements in Allied protective equipment, saving countless lives as the fight against Japan intensified. After the war, he returned to civilian medicine, becoming a professor at the National Medical College in Shanghai, and later emigrating to Taiwan following the Communist Revolution in mainland China. Captain Huang took a different path, remaining with the Chinese army through the liberation of Burma and the subsequent civil war in China. He eventually rose to the rank of colonel in the Army of the Republic of China on Taiwan, where he helped establish one of the most advanced military medical systems in Asia. Throughout his career, he maintained that the discovery of the Japanese gas mask vulnerability had been a turning point, not just in the Burma campaign, but in his own understanding of the relationship between medicine and warfare. The full story of Operation Quicksilver remained classified for decades after the war, with only fragmented accounts appearing in memoirs and specialized military histories. When documents related to the operation were finally declassified in the 1980s, they revealed a complex narrative of scientific ingenuity, tactical adaptation, and ethical compromise that defied simple categorization. What is beyond dispute is that a seemingly minor discovery, a chemical substitution in an enemy gas mask, had ripple effects far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The exploitation of this vulnerability saved Allied lives, accelerated the Japanese retreat from Burma, and helped secure the vital supply route from India to China that would ultimately contribute to Japan's defeat. In the jungles of Burma, where conventional military calculations often proved inadequate, it was the observation skills of a Chinese medical officer that tipped the balance. Lieutenant Zhao never considered himself a hero. In his memoir, published shortly before his death in 1992, he described his discovery as simply the application of basic chemistry in unusual circumstances. Yet his actions embodied the ingenuity and adaptability that characterized the Allied response to Japanese aggression throughout the Pacific War. The story of the Japanese gas mask vulnerability offers a powerful reminder that in warfare, as in medicine, the most consequential discoveries often emerge not from grand strategies, but from careful observation of small details. A single chemical substitution, made necessary by wartime shortages, created a weakness that even the most sophisticated military planning could not anticipate. And a single individual, applying specialized knowledge in a critical moment, was able to identify that weakness and change the course of a campaign. As we reflect on the complex legacy of World War II, we are often drawn to dramatic narratives of beach landings, aerial dogfights, and massive tank battles. But the war was also fought in laboratories, field hospitals, and makeshift research facilities, where individuals like Lieutenant Zhao Wen applied scientific knowledge to military problems, sometimes with profound consequences. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not just for the tactical advantages they provided, but for the deeper lessons they offer about the unpredictable nature of conflict and the enduring value of specialized expertise. The Burma campaign of 1942 stands as a testament to the importance of adaptability in warfare. When conventional military approaches proved inadequate against the challenges of jungle terrain and monsoon weather, it was the ability to identify and exploit unexpected vulnerabilities that ultimately made the difference. The discovery of the fatal flaw in Japanese gas masks reminds us that even the most carefully designed protective systems can harbor hidden weaknesses, and that identifying those weaknesses often requires crossing the boundaries between disciplines and professions. In the final analysis, the story of Lieutenant Zhao and Operation Quicksilver offers a powerful example of how individual initiative and specialized knowledge can transform the dynamics of warfare. A single discovery, made in a makeshift laboratory amid the monsoon rains of Burma, saved thousands of lives and helped secure an Allied victory in one of the most challenging theaters of World War II. As we face the complex security challenges of our own era, we would do well to remember this lesson, that the most significant advantages often emerge not from technological superiority or numerical strength, but from the careful observation and creative thinking of individuals willing to challenge conventional assumptions. Would you have seen what Lieutenant Zhao saw in that captured gas mask? Would you have recognized the significance of a small chemical substitution that others had overlooked? These questions invite us to consider not just the historical specifics of the Burma campaign, but the broader importance of observation, analysis, and adaptation in responding to challenges that may initially seem insurmountable. Share this story so others remember what courage and ingenuity really mean, even in the darkest moments of history.